Hello, everyone from the Authors Guild Foundation. My name's Johnny. We're here for the final event in this year's series of From Manuscript to Marketplace, where we enjoy candid conversations about the current realities of publishing. We hear from an author and members of their publishing team about a recent book's path to publication. Over the last couple months, we've featured memoir, literary fiction, middle grade, YA, and today we're excited to have a work in translation. Sevastopol, a work of fiction in 3 stories by Brazilian author Emilio Fraia, with English translation by Zoe Perry. And joining them here is Tynan Kogan, editor at New Directions, the publisher of the US edition. So From Manuscript to Marketplace is made possible with help from our donors and funding from NYSCA, the New York State Council on the Arts. Thank you to them. They've graciously allowed us to offer these events free and online to the public. You can find past From Manuscript to Marketplace events on our site or by searching YouTube for Authors Guild. And by the way, membership in the Authors Guild, if you're interested, is open to all authors published in the US, including translators. And now today's guests, Emilio Fraia is from Sao Paulo. Sevastopol is his English language debut, and in addition to New Directions, it's published by Lolly Editions in the UK. Fraia was named one of Granta's best young Brazilian writers, and other work of his in English has appeared in the New Yorker, Paris Review, Grand Journal, and the collection of works in translation, 2 Lines, 19 Passageways. Zoe Perry's translations of contemporary Portuguese language fiction and nonfiction have appeared in the New Yorker, the White Review, Granta, Words Without Borders, Latin American Literature Today, and the Paris Review. And Tynan Kogan is an editor at New Directions. He was raised in Seattle and graduated from the New School. He works with literary fiction, poetry, and nonfiction. He's recently worked on books by Maria Stepanova, Moira Davy, Hiroko Oyamada, and many more. And he's edited 2 anthologies of poetry, French love poems and cat poems, which sound like great holiday gifts if you're in the market. And with that, I'll turn it over to the 3 of you to tell us about Sevastopol. Hope my pronunciation is good enough, and how the English edition came about. Zoe, why don't you tell us how you became attached to this?
I feel like since the book came out, Amelia and I have talked a lot about how the way that Sevastopol came into English was a little bit unusual, at least for my end as a translator. But then I started thinking about other books I've done, and I kind of don't think any project has been the same way twice. So, but the reason this was unusual is because it is a book of 3 stories, and Emilio's publisher in Brazil sent me one of the stories, the second one of the 3, to do as a sample, to translate a sample, because they were going to go try and pitch it to publishers in the US. And so then that story was picked up. No, sorry, that one was not picked up by the New Yorker. I ended up translating a 3rd story, the last story in the book, and that one was picked up by the New Yorker. And then I'm not actually sure of the details of how New Directions fits in on this timeline, but I'm sure Tynan will let us know. And so the reason I always say it's unusual is because I wasn't translating the stories in order. And the way that it worked out just in timing, I ended up kind of doing 1 story a year until the book finally came out, which as a translator, I thought was great because I think sometimes we talk about drawer time for translation. So it's really nice to be able to work on a translation and think that it's in a pretty good place and then walk away from it for a while. And so to be able to sort of sit with these stories for that amount of time really felt like a luxury. And I think just made the translation probably better because I was able to think a little bit more. There's a lot of elements that run through the 3 stories, some of them more obvious than others. So that time really let me sort of think more about those and the connections between the stories.
Yeah. Tynan?
Yeah, I guess I first heard about your work, Emilio, from your agent Laurence, who works for RCW in London. And she tipped us off that one of the stories was going to be published in the New Yorker. And so we quickly read it, and then really quickly wanted to publish it, and wrote back to her. And I was just totally seduced by the quality of that story. I think it's fantastic. It was the one that eventually did appear in the New Yorker. And I think maybe as we were reading it, I started hearing from other people. Amelia is very lucky to be friends with a lot of the people who are sort of facilitating the transmission of literature from Portuguese in Brazil into English. So I think two translators wrote to me separately saying, "Oh, Amelia, you have to read his work." So there were lots of people sort of telling me that Amelia was great, and so is his work, and then the work spoke for itself. And then yeah, I think we made an offer within a few weeks of having first read that bit, and then yeah, and then the book came out maybe a little over a year later.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for that background. I'm sure our audience has plenty of just English language authors, also translators in the audience. So this is all great information. And everyone in the audience, please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A box below. All right. So now let's take it back. And Amelia, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the book? It sounds very interesting, of course.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Johnny, thank you for the invitation here. I'm very happy. And this book, Sevastopol, I published it in Brazil in the end of 2018. And well, and during 2019, a lot of reviews and well, readings appeared in Brazil. And okay, like I thought in that time that it the way and the path of the book was finished. And so, and in the end of 2019, this story that Zoe mentioned appeared in New Yorker, and it was the first Brazilian short story to be translated into English for the magazine. And that's a very weird thing. So it was a kind of rebirth of the book, and then with the story in New Yorker, Laurence, that's my agent nowadays, we started a conversation, and she started to work with the book, and then now in 2021, the book was published by New Directions and by Lolly. It's a small publishing house in London, and it will be published in Sweden now on January, and then in Norway. So and so I'm very happy, and I think New Yorker opened the doors for the book in like internationally, because well, the book was the career of the book in Brazil was very good, but New Yorker was the big change for this work, I think. And well, and Zoe worked in like I think because we sent to New Yorker a story from book, and they told us, oh, this story is very it's huge, it's well, and so, and like we love it, but we need a short one. And so we and I thought, wow, I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know if they really like it, and so we tried to translate another one because the book is
which wasn't that much shorter either. That's, I mean, the thing with that feedback is they were like, oh, this story's way too long. Can you send us a shorter one? And that story, I mean, yes, it is slightly shorter, but it's still very long. So I always questioned if that was real feedback or not. But yeah, it's funny.
Yeah. And so and that was it. And
yeah.
Someone asks, Emilio, is it important to you that the translator is very familiar with your culture if they're going to do the translation? And Zoe, if you could comment on that. I believe you lived in Brazil for a time.
Yeah, I lived in Brazil for about 5 years. And that was 10 years ago now, but pre-pandemic, I would go back once a year. And I still have a lot of friends there. I'm married to a Brazilian, so I have in-laws and family there. So I still have a pretty strong connection. I think it's very important to know the culture, even though out of these 3 stories, only one take is set. Well, I guess the first one is sort of partially set in Brazil, and then the third one is set in Brazil. I don't know, I guess they all have a connection to Brazil, but so there's a lot of stuff going on but I think absolutely you have to know the culture. Just on a linguistic level, I think even if you're familiar with, say you learn Portuguese in Portugal, it's quite different. And there's a lot of potential for making mistakes, I think, that you're not even aware of. Yeah.
So you did one translation for the UK and the US. Not
I mean,
the same translation.
Yeah, you mean like editing? So I guess because Lolly came in after we'd already edited, right, Tynan? So I think they changed the spelling on a few things, but that was it. Yeah.
Okay. Tynan, can you tell us a bit more about your role in the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a relatively light edit, as I remember. This was like, I don't know, 10 projects ago, so I'm kind of scratching my head. But yeah, as I remember, it was a pretty light edit. Zoe did a really terrific job of like capturing what I think of as your sort of like Chekhovian prose that leaves a lot beneath the surface. And yeah, I guess yeah, like on a copy editing sort of sentence by sentence level, there was not a ton to be done. But then in terms of promoting it, I tried to like send it to lots of people who I thought would be interested. After a lot of nagging, we finally got Patti Smith to read it, and she was very enthusiastic about this book. So yeah, trying to like find the right audiences for it in the US, which is always kind of fun. And I think Emilio's work fits so well into the New Directions catalog. We published several other Brazilian books. We published like all of Clarice Lispector, and more recently this kind of crazy writer named Rajuan Nassar. And so I don't know, I think it's not difficult to convince our audience to read Emilio's work because it seems to be in discussion with a lot of our writers. Yeah. I mean, not only the Brazilian writers, but also like, I don't know, when I was reading the story for the first time, I immediately thought of like Roberto Bolaño, sort of tonally and in terms of, yeah, the development of the narrative through these little kind of clues and yeah, so.
So the US typically lags behind in readership of works in translation. Is that changing?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends. This one's kind of a funny case where like there was a US publisher and then as you mentioned, a few other European languages now. Usually it's sort of the other way around. Like there's a German edition and then a French edition and then, you know, 10 languages later there's an American edition. But yeah, maybe I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Another audience question. How should an author go about finding a suitable translator? What sort of questions should they ask, and how does that, like Zoe, you said you translated one story first. Is that a normal sort of process?
Although I think it's there's a lot of different ways this can come about, but like I don't usually have an author who approaches me finding. It's usually coming from either the publisher in the US or the UK or an agent. Or then in this case, like I frequently do samples for Emilio's publisher in Brazil so that they can try and pitch them abroad. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't have any advice on that part.
Sure.
Yeah.
So if you've written a book in English and you think it would have a market overseas in another language, the best route is through an agent pitching it to foreign publishers.
Probably.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, but if you can, it's certainly gone before where I read a book from Brazil that I really, really liked, and I contacted the author and asked if I could do a short sample and then pitch it. I have a horrible track record for pitching, but I always think agents are probably better at that than me, but.
Sure. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the release and marketing. And Emilio, you could comment on the Brazilian edition as well. I guess it came out just before the pandemic, but what has that been like? What's been your experience marketing these last couple of years? Have you done virtual events or interviews, anything like that?
In Brazil?
Yeah, in Brazil or anywhere.
Yeah, and well, in Brazil, the release of the book was a normal one with like presential events and well, and now unfortunately in US and UK we had some virtual events because the pandemic, and I was planning to go to US if and it wasn't possible. So I think that's what we can do with the pandemic, but I'm very happy with the virtual events also. So like we did one in the public library of Brooklyn that was very cool. And that's it. And it was very interesting to see the difference between the American market and the English and market, because the book was released at the same time in UK and US, and it was very interesting to see the readings, the reviews, and because they were they appeared at the same time in so yeah, it was I think for me it was a very interesting experience. I don't know if Zoe agree with this, because Zoe and Tynan, they are well reading this reviews and on the book. So I don't know.
No, I've been really pleased with the promotion that's been done for the book. I think we've done a lot of interesting different kinds of things, like the interview that we did for what was it called, Hotel, I can't remember. Yeah, that was fun, where we just kind of did an interview by email, like back and forth. So that was nice. We did a couple of podcasts that I liked. That's the first time I've done podcasts, and that was fun.
Okay. Emilio, did you have have edits to Zoe's translation? Did you read it in its entirety before it went to print?
Yeah, of course. For me, well, it's difficult because it's not my language. I can to well, discuss this in a very good way, I think. But
Sure,
and
sure.
I'm very happy with because something that made me really happy in the Zoe's translation was seeing how she managed to make the elements and atmospheres travel through these stories. And so that was for me I don't know, the most important thing. And I felt this. So and I can remember the doubts or something that we discussed at Zoe.
Yeah,
You remember
I
something?
remember definitely sending you questions for each story,
Uh-huh.
but I don't remember. I feel like there were a lot of questions because usually I'm asking because the book is, there's so much under the surface and you don't want to, that's not revealed in the Portuguese, so it also can't be revealed in English. But then some ways the best way to keep that under the surface in English is to know exactly what's going on. So clearing away all mystery and intrigue, and then actually just rebuilding it. So yeah, I do remember asking you a lot of questions that I felt like was ruining the whole mystique of the book, but I needed to do that.
Yeah.
All right. Please feel free to use the Q&A if you have any more questions for us. Yeah. What else can we discuss? Like who decides on the cover design and things like that in this situation? It seems like it's a different workflow with different people involved than a book in the native language.
The sort of biggest agency I had in that was recommending the cover designer. We have an art director who sends our books to different designers depending on who we think would understand the aesthetic of the book. And for this one, I recommended a particular person, I think Oliver Monday, right? Who did a really terrific batch of covers, and I thought this was the strongest of the batch. And then I sent it to Emilio and Zoe to confirm that I wasn't crazy and thinking this was the best. So
Yeah, I love the cover.
Yeah.
And then I think Lolly did a sort of like spin-off of a
Yeah.
sort of similar image, and yeah.
Yeah, I love it, the cover, because for me remind me the work of a photographer that I love, Luigi Ghirri. It's an Italian photographer, and like this kind of postcard inside a scene, and well, and it reminded me a strategy of the book about stories within stories. And I really love it, the Tynan work and the New Directions work in the cover. It was very, very cool, very nice.
And the third story that starts with the postcard. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone asks Zoe and Tynan, in your experience, what are the most effective ways to boost sales of the translation? Is it more about reviews or word of mouth, celebrity endorsements? Is there anything else that moves the needle the most, would you say? Or does it just vary from book to book?
I mean, I can say things that I've seen have hindered sales of a book in the past, both like not necessarily with books that I've translated, but even books that friends of mine have translated. I've seen books that have been categorized kind of incorrectly. So like, for example, a book, because I mean, often a book will fit into multiple categories. And then, so a friend of mine translated a book and they've categorized it as horror, even though it is very much literary fiction. And I read the book and I wouldn't have called it horror necessarily. So that means in some bookstores, it ends up being put in a totally different section. Or just by the same, like some bookstores, the way they put their books out on the shelves, they'll have a separate translated fiction section, which is fine if you're trying to get customers who are looking for translated books. But I think a lot of people will just skip over that because it's just less visible. I don't really love translated fiction sections. I like them to be mixed in if possible.
It
Yeah,
was in a
reviews.
translation section at my local bookstore.
Yeah.
I noticed that.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings. I don't know. I think like I would go to I'd seek out a translated fiction section in a bookstore if they have one, but otherwise.
But then whose name is it alphabetized under? There's
The author.
Yeah.
Although that happened
Well,
to me once too. A book that I translated, the guy, as is often happens with Latin American authors, they have more than one last name, and they'd alphabetized it by not the right last name, in my opinion. So like I was like, oh, it's not here. And then I looked in a different letter and there it was. So yeah.
Right. So you mentioned you did some events together. Is that normal for you, Zoe, for this and other books?
I mean, I've translated authors who are dead, so no, that's new. And then even for living, I mean, Amelia's got good English. There's a lot of authors, I think, who don't speak English well enough to do events, or just don't want to do events in English.
And it's a big travel commitment when it's an in-person
Yeah.
event.
So I mean, in that way,
presumably.
having all these virtual events has been helpful.
Someone asked for an overview of the timeline. So the original written text was completed in 2018, you said, Amelia?
Yeah, 2018.
So, and I did the sample of the second story in 2018 before the book was even published in Brazil, I believe. Yeah. And then the story came out in the New Yorker around like right before Christmas in 2019.
1 year later.
Yeah.
And then you translated.
And then the third story.
No, the third story.
The first story.
Yeah.
So I was doing that, and during the pandemic, like the summer of 2020. And then it was published June 2021.
So that's pretty fast. I mean, obviously it could be years or decades before work appears in another language.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this, how the speed of things also really varies depending on the country. Like I remember seeing a Brazilian author once said, oh, I just finished my manuscript for my new book. It should be on the shelves in a few months. And I was just like, oh God, like, are you sure you want to have that on the shelves in 3 months? It seems really fast. I mean, and then translations can often be really stretched out. Like I finished a translation in August, and I don't think that's going to be published until 2023. So.
Okay. Yeah. Do you work one project at a time, Zoe, or are you juggling multiple things?
Yes, but not because I'm turning things down, just because that's what I'm asked to do. I also do a lot of translation for like cultural institutions and art galleries and stuff like that. So I always usually have something alongside.
That makes sense. Tynan, someone asks if you could tell us a little bit more about the scope and mission of New Directions.
Yeah, we publish about 40 books a year. So we have a relatively small list, and I think about 30 of those are usually works in translation. We definitely specialize in trying to publish literature from all around the world, but including, works that were written originally in English as well. We mostly do like experimental literature. New Directions was kind of founded in a modernist tradition of publishing all kinds of, mostly like experimental poets and novelists and occasionally literary criticism. So yeah, Emilio's work fits into that really well because it's, Sevastopol is a very unconventional kind of book, and you can read it multiple different ways. And I think we're really lucky to have sort of found these sensibilities that work well with each other. Yeah.
Nice. And Johnny, regarding the virtual events, I was thinking about one thing because in this virtual event, sometimes I listen to Zoe reading some passage of of her translation, or we read some excerpt of the book. So, and every time I heard her read excerpt of the book out loud, I have the vivid sense she is reading a text that was entirely her own, and it's very interesting to listen to the book, and like it's kind of like I forget that those words correspond to something I had said or written in another language. It's a very interesting experience for me, because this is my first book in translation, so it's a very nice experience.
It's really interesting. I mean, you want it to be true to your work, but it's also a new book of its own in another sense. I'm sure it's odd as the author. Someone asked about your compensation, Zoe. You don't have to spill hard numbers if you don't want to, but how does it typically work? A lump sum, word count, etc.
Yeah, I think it's usually based on word count. And I think most commonly you'll see 50% on signature of the contract and then 50% when you finish the translation. Other publishers do things slightly differently. As far as rates, also that's going to vary depending on other things like what the way royalties are calculated and you might be willing to do something at a slightly lower rate, but if you're given a lot of time to do it so that you can do other things, I don't know. So a lot of factors kind of go into that. The Translators Association, which is part of the Society Authors, is sort of like the UK version of the Authors Guild. They publish some stuff about rates, although that's always been slightly confusing because I've seen publishers definitely refer to that as like the goal rate. Like, oh, aren't we doing a great job because we're paying this rate that the TA has published? But actually what the TA has said is that that's a recommended or like an observed minimum. So that's really where the starting point of your negotiation should be, not what we're all striving to get. So yeah.
Anju says, Emilio, I loved reading your book. Many scenes and moments have stayed with me, and it was a lovely translation. So cheers, Zoe. But a question for Tynan, could you share a little about the acquisition process at New Directions, in particular for debut novels?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it depends on each different project. So in Emilio's case, the Sevastopol came to us from his agent, Laurence, as we said earlier. And we've worked with Laurence before. She also represents a couple other New Directions writers. There's one Danish writer named Olga Raun, and she's also represented Laszlo Krasznahorkai, and we've published maybe 10 of his books now. So when Laurent says something is good for New Directions, we usually sort of listen and take it very seriously. Yeah, I guess in this case, there was a pretty long sample to work with. Often we'll try to make a decision based off of 5 pages of a sample translation. Whereas in this case, it was probably closer to like 20 or 30, which felt like a big luxury to have. And yeah, after we read the one story, we wrote to Laurence and made an offer to publish it. So it was relatively straightforward as these things go, I guess.
Do you only take agented submissions?
Yeah, mostly, just because otherwise we're completely overwhelmed. We're a pretty small staff of 10 people, and there's 3 full-time editors here, and we're always scrambling to keep up with how much is sent, and so it just becomes a little too overwhelming if we kind of open it up to everyone.
Of course. Well, we can wrap it up there. I think this has been great to hear about work in translation. We've rarely covered works in translation on this series before, so this is great. The Authors Guild is just getting started with a translators group. Julia Sanchez, a Brazilian translator of many languages, is on our council, and she's heading that up. So we hope there are good things to come from that. Any final parting advice for authors out there, maybe completing a manuscript and wondering what they should do next?
It sort of didn't come up during the discussion, but I mean, I wonder how your work as an editor has informed your work as a writer. Emilio.
Yeah, I was thinking that would be interesting to talk about too.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, Tynan. I couldn't understand your. Yeah,
oh,
sorry.
just maybe how working as an editor is related to working as a writer.
Okay, of course, yeah. Well, yeah, I work as an editor in Brazil also, and I think the way the editor reads and the writer reads is very different, I think, but on the other hand, it's a very it's a great pleasure, and it's very interesting to see the writing from 2 different places as an editor and as a writer, and they are very different, I think, the way. And I think the challenge is time, because the work in the publishing house is very hard, and so I have to write like on the morning, and I prefer to write on the morning, and so and it's a little bit difficult to find this balance, but it's very interesting to feel like the writing for these 2 different places, I think, and like sometimes turn on the editor and sometimes turn off the way that editor reads and start to reading as a writer. That's I think it's another kind of they are very different and they are. I love being an editor, but I think they are. You need to find this the way that you approach to the books.
Thank you for that. Well, thanks to the three of you for joining us today. And muito obrigado, Amelia, for being here. Zoe, thanks for getting in touch with us and helping set up this event. This is lovely. Thanks to everyone in the audience for joining us. Like I said, there are more from Manuscript to Marketplace events on our YouTube featuring different genres, and each is a different story. So it's always interesting. And with that, I'll say goodbye. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us here, Johnny. And I hope you can enjoy Sevastopol. Okay, nice. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.